Welcome to Ahoy, Minnetonka. This is our district podcast where we discuss the latest in education, innovation, and student success. I'm your host, Superintendent of Minnetonka Schools, David Law. And today we're talking about a topic that's at the heart of learning, literacy. Literacy is the foundation of everything we do in education, and our district is making significant strides in ensuring every student is set up for success. This topic ties in directly with one of our school board goals, excellence in student learning and support. We had an initial discussion on our district's literacy efforts last fall on this podcast, where we just scratched the surface of this important topic. So this is a continuation so that we can even dive deeper in literacy. Joining me today are Associate Superintendent Dr. LaDue and Literacy Coordinator Alyssa Rutherford, who are leading the way in our district's literacy initiatives. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with just a re-grounding for our new audience. Why is literacy so important in public education?
Well, as we think about literacy is really the cornerstone for all student learning. We think often about kids learning to read, and that happens in elementary school, but then it's really using all of those skills and strategies to access all of their learning in 6-12 and beyond. Also, literacy is really an essential life skill that helps people be successful, not only in their formal education, but in the workforce as well as in life in general.
And when people think of literacy, sometimes the focus is reading, but really literacy can include writing, it includes speaking, it includes all forms of communication with people. And of course, communicating with people is essential to human experience.
So we covered this in the fall, but I just want to reiterate this. Probably most of our parents learn to read differently than we know is good today. What has changed and when did that change come?
That's a loaded question. There's a lot to that.
Right.
Obviously, depending on the era that you learned to read, as well as the era that our teachers went to college, research pointed at different ideas and different practices. But in the last couple of decades, that research has been refined, and we now know a lot more about how the brain works and how that helps an individual develop literacy skills.
We call it today the science of reading. And that's been around in probably our post-secondary institutions, maybe not even the last 10 years consistently, do you think?
Yeah, probably. I mean, in pockets potentially, or if you did certain reading specialist programs, maybe sooner, right?
Sure.
But the National Reading Panel in the year 2000 was kind of the first coming together of all of that information into one place. That was probably the most prominently known research compilation study, right?
I share that just because a lot of our parents don't realize if you were in public education before 2000, you likely had some different approaches to reading and literacy instruction.
Yeah.
Dr. LaDue, we as a district started really ramping up our literacy proficiency within the last 5 years. What were some of the driving forces for that? Because we're a very high-performing district.
We are a very high-performing district, but as Alyssa mentioned, as more information about how people learn to read became more prominent, and as we looked at the continuum of teachers' skills and background knowledge in this area, while we do very well as a district, we're also a district that we expect all students, or each student, to be able to read effectively and to be able to use those skills to be successful in whatever they choose to pursue, both during their education and after. And so reading was an important area because we knew that despite our good results, there were some kids we weren't reaching yet.
And why not make sure that we use the most effective and efficient practices with that initial instruction to scoop up as many kids as possible, versus trying to intervene when our initial instruction isn't as solid as it could be.
Right. So about a year and a half after we listed this as a board goal, the state enacted the READ Act. Can you two talk about some of the components of the READ Act that we are starting to align with?
Yep, absolutely. So the READ Act really centered on shifting the goal to looking at how kids are doing every year and whether a student receives English learner skills or supports and or special education, how are we helping all kids be effective in meeting those goals? And so it really looked at how we're training teachers and aligning practice. It looks at how we're ensuring that our curriculum and our resources are aligned to those practices. It's looking at how we're assessing kids and how we're making sure that we know where they're at, what they need next, and how we can accelerate that. And then it's just making sure that we're systematically developing plans that ensure not only those foundational literacy skills, but how we're thinking about literacy across K-12 and early childhood.
One of the things I was impressed with was how frequently authors of the READ Act reached out to Minnetonka, and specifically you, Dr. LaDue, for feedback on that legislation. What were some of the things that they were asking for feedback that we provided?
Certainly we provided feedback on professional learning, on timelines, on accessing the tools and supports that the state was coming forward with, as well as we've provided extensive feedback on assessment, particularly because in addition to our English program, Minnetonka has both a Chinese immersion and a Spanish immersion program, and we're really committed to making sure that our students are literate and successful in all of our language programs, and ensuring that all students, of course, are successful with English language.
Alyssa, when you came on in the district, one of the first things we started to do was robust professional development. Our board approved some additional calendar days. Now, the READ Act identified specific professional development platforms that districts had to use. Which one did we choose and how did we implement?
Yeah, so they identified the 3 programs or the 3 providers in August, and we had these new professional learning days on the calendar for the purpose of providing this READ Act required training. And it became apparent that we wouldn't have access to registering for those platforms, so we partnered with Core Learning to provide a customized in-person version of the blended learning platform that MDE has said was one of the choices. And MDE said, yes, you can go forward with this in-person version. It's aligned to the same content, uses the same resources. So we were able to start sooner on this professional learning journey, if you will. I feel like it's a journey.
It is a journey.
And even though we've completed the 5-day course, it's an ongoing journey because now it's going to be implementation of, and teachers are ongoing implementing the things that they've been learning along the way. But coming this fall, we'll have some new resources and new ELA curriculum so teachers can then fully embed some of those strategies they've been learning in the core learning training from the Teaching Reading Source Book. And what's nice about it is that all 3 of the platforms that the state identified are curriculum agnostic, so no matter what resource districts adopt, the strategies and the science-based, evidence-based reading instructional practices that teachers are learning can be paired with those resources. So, and really, like, teaching reading is more about the teacher moves and the instructional practices than it is about the resources that are used. Obviously, certain resources might support teachers in being able to do it more streamlined and more easily, but really any text can be used appropriately if you know what those instructional practices are, which is one of the reasons why I very much appreciate that the READ Act has that professional learning as one of the key components, because that's essential if we expect teachers to be able to teach reading in the ways that are most effective.
And one of the great things about us being able to partner with CORE and them being able to customize for Minnetonka was it allowed our teachers to do all of that professional learning in person, collaboratively with like grade level teams and with the support of our principals and administrators. And so that professional learning really became interactive and an opportunity not just to learn individually, but to learn and grow as teams.
Unique in my memory is the fact that this isn't just professional development for teachers. They have to take a test or multiple tests and pass. We're just going through that. How is that process going?
I think overall, our teachers are doing a great job. They did the deep learning, they've done the work, and now they're getting an opportunity to demonstrate that both in a multiple choice format as well as to do some short answer reflection and to provide evidence of how they've applied their learning. So it's really that theory to practice or that opportunity to show their application and their transfer through that process that's been very valuable.
I was talking to a teacher the other day and she was like, I haven't taken them yet because I'm really actually excited about digging back in and reviewing all of this. And I was like, good for you, that's awesome. And I agree with that. There's always more to learn. I did letters training and there was a bunch of tests embedded throughout. And even doing core training, some of the same content is covered and there's still just a deeper knowledge you get when you repeat things over again. And so that's hopefully going to be a nice capstone for teachers to remind themselves of all the great learning that they've done so far.
So one of the things that we've talked about as a district is ELA standards. ELA and standards might be foreign concepts for our community. Can you just dig in a little bit on definitions of those things?
Yes. So when we say ELA, we're talking about our English Language Arts standards. And when we talk about standards, the state identifies what we want kids to know and be able to do at each grade level related to each content area. So while currently we're reviewing the English Language Arts or ELA standards, there are standards for social studies, science, math, as well as state or national standards for most elective areas.
So you both have referenced this, and I think for the public it's a point of confusion. There are new ELA standards or updated ELA standards. Amy, how often does the state update standards?
So the state has a process where their plan, starting in the late first decade of the 2000s, was to update standards every 10 years. Obviously with COVID, some of those timelines were pushed back, so it's actually been slightly more than 10 years. But the state updated those standards in the 2023-24 school year, and districts must implement those standards in the 2025-26 school year. So when the state does an update, they afford districts an opportunity to plan for that, to do a comprehensive curriculum review process, and then to prepare teachers to implement those changes.
So the state updates standards. A team in Minnetonka looks at our materials to see if they're aligned to those standards. And if they aren't, what happens? What are we doing right now to modify the stuff that we're using to teach so that we're aligned to standards?
So I'm going to say a few things and then I'm going to turf it to you, Alyssa. As we think about updating standards, obviously we look to say where did they make changes in the actual standards? What are our priorities? Has anything shifted? How have we done? And do we have gaps and holes in how kids are achieving as a result of our current instruction? And then we look at our materials and say, do these align both with the standards as well as the instructional practices that we know are best, which is where we've seen one of the most significant changes during this last decade or so. So we bring teachers together from every grade level or across courses
and this is
in
happening
6-12. Now. Yep. And when I say across courses, obviously our high school has a plethora of courses. It's those core required courses because all of our other courses are built off of those standards. So currently we have teams working, and I'm going to let Alyssa tell you a little bit about that work.
Yeah. Obviously for the elementary teachers, the READ Act has been an interesting piece of this process because the READ Act required CARE, the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement from the University of Minnesota, and the Minnesota Department of Education to partner in a curricular resource review. And so they have a rubric that they've used to analyze publisher-submitted materials, and then they posted the results of that review, and that has been informing what resources we've sort of been looking at, and then also using that rubric if it's a resource that hasn't been reviewed, because that rubric outlines really those evidence-based literacy practices we want to see, and some of the things we don't want to see, they call them red flags in the rubric. And so even before they had that review posted last January, our team had been looking at what the rubric was going to look like, and then thinking about how our current resources follow or not follow some of those look-fors and red flags. And then this fall, we started piloting some resources from what's called the highly aligned list. And I don't know how much detail we want to get into, but it's been a process still to just kind of look at that. They finally posted some of the results from the reconsideration of that review, and there's still not a lot of choices on the highly aligned list. And we know that not one resource is going to really meet the needs of our K-5 system, and so we need to put together something that will work for each grade level and meeting all of the strands of Scarborough's rote plus writing, since that's obviously part of literacy as well. So it's been a process.
The MDE doesn't typically give a list of approved books for a curricular area. This is new.
This is new for the state of Minnesota. You do see that in other states. Often there's state-adopted curricular resources. Minnesota, with the READ Act for the first time, is providing a list of resources to give guidance to districts. And then as a district, we still have local control to make decisions that we think best serve our students, but those any resources we implement must support evidence-based practices.
So we're, the 25-26 school year is right around the corner. We must be close to recommending some materials or a package of resources for teachers?
Yes, we are. We have been very successful with our pilot as it relates to foundational skills. We've had the opportunity, and you've had the opportunity, to see those in action in the classroom, and we're hearing great things from both teachers and from students, as well as seeing students demonstrate amazing skills. Additionally, as Alyssa alluded to, we've looked at resources that were on that highly aligned list, and based on our structure and our system, have identified additional resources to look at that meet components of the rubric, or the most important components, but will serve us better, we believe, as a district. So we're very close. We'll be bringing those, review the process, the findings to the school board later this spring, and then recommending resources for K-5. 6-12 will be a little longer process. They've looked at the standards, aligned units, are looking at resources, but next year they'll be piloting, because curricular resources don't exist in the same way. At 6-12, it's often about those mentor texts or student choice texts that help support the learning students are doing.
Well, one of the things I want to get to before we run short on time is the reading core. We have this list of extensions and interventions to help students, whether they're well above grade level or below grade level. And new this year at 2 of our schools is the reading core. Alyssa, what's a reading core?
Reading Core is a program through AMPACT and AmeriCorps, and they hire tutors who are kind of volunteers. They get a nice benefits package and a stipend, but those tutors are highly trained in specific targeted reading interventions, and then they deliver those interventions either one-to-one or with a pair. And there's also support from AmeriCorps to check for fidelity to the intervention, so we know that it's being implemented appropriately, and there's progress monitoring to double check that the students are actually acquiring the skills that are being targeted. At the 2 schools we've piloted, nearly every student is making accelerated growth. All of them are making progress, and then what's nice is that we get to see how much progress are they making, is that the progress we're expecting, and then implement additional layers of support if needed. Or there is actually some students right now who are exiting because they've made enough progress to say that they're back on track. So We actually put in applications for a tutor from Reading Corps to be in all of our buildings. There's not much of an investment on our part. We have an internal coach who supports the tutor, but as far as a financial investment, it's really the AmeriCorps is providing that piece for us. We just need to provide space and then the Minnetonka support so that the tutor feels part of the school community. So if you're interested in being a Reading Corps tutor, look for those applications maybe later this spring, early summer, potentially from the principals at the buildings that will say, we're recruiting. And then again, AmeriCorps and AMPAC, they're the ones that do the hiring. But we can still say, this is the link if you want to apply.
Sure.
So,
before we wrap up, one of the things I want to make sure we give our parents are things that parents can do to help their children. What are some things parents can do to support these new literacy initiatives?
Obviously, we always hear read with your child. And I think that that's commonly known, but I think sometimes once children start to read independently, parents think it's better to have kids practice their reading, and it's really a both and, because we know students' oral language development usually exceeds their reading ability for several years after they become a proficient reader. And so there's a great opportunity there. Additionally, just taking their kids lots of places that build background knowledge and introducing them to vocabulary specific to those outings that they might not come across in their day-to-day life is highly beneficial. We know from the research that background knowledge and vocabulary are keys to students being successful with literacy. Initial or additional ideas, Alyssa?
Just piggybacking on that, the text that we encounter in children's literature and things like that, the vocabulary is much more robust than what we would use even as college-educated adults in everyday language. So that's why the reading to and with your child is helpful, because they get access to those vocabulary words that they wouldn't typically get access to just by listening or being part of conversations.
And an interesting stat with that, as we like stats, is a preschool picture book typically has twice as many of those rare vocabulary words that kids would encounter than a conversation amongst adults. And so it's really, we don't think of preschool books as being dense or intense with vocabulary,
sure.
vocabulary rich, but they are. And that's one of the great reasons why even all through elementary school, reading picture books is beneficial.
Well, I want to thank you both for sharing so much information about our literacy plans, the state's READ Act, how they're aligned, our ELA adoption, and even some tips for parents. I know that there are a lot of parents who have questions about this, so I'm guessing this has been very valuable for them. Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this episode of our district podcast, Ahoy, Minnetonka, where we learned a lot about literacy initiatives happening in the district. We'll see you the next time on our next podcast of Ahoy, Minnetonka.